As pastors and church leaders, we want to raise resilient kids. So I'm here today with pastor and author Chris Brown. Chris, you've pastored your church for over 30 years, which is remarkable in itself, but you've also raised 5 children with your wife, Ruth. What do you think's the single biggest tension pastors face between shepherding their church and shepherding their own children?
Well, John, I would have to say it's all about prioritizing, which is then found in the time management that we have, because obviously my number one priority as a pastor is to follow and serve Jesus. And
Mm,
then as a pastor, I'm called to lead and love the church. But my first priority is actually to my family, to my wife and
mm,
kids. And that's why, when we read in First Timothy 3, I think it is, where Paul says, qualifications of elders, he says, and church leaders, he says, well, it should be that you manage your own family well. And if anyone doesn't know how to manage their family, how can they take care of God's church? So that's got to be a priority. So as much as pastors love their church and want to help people, we've got to remember our first place, our first priority is within the home. So for Ruth and myself, with our kids, we were always determined not to sacrifice the family on the altar of church ministry. We prioritized our family, but that doesn't mean neglecting the church. In fact, you're actually building a solid foundation for church
yeah.
ministry, because your life ends up being healthy and balanced and less stressed if you're not freaking out about, your home life. And of course, you're providing a good role model for others. If you're a pastor and you've got people in your church, obviously, who are parents, hopefully you're, discipling them by modeling what a good parent looks like. Not perfect, but at least having a good crack at it.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great thought there of managing the tension by managing your priorities. And in your book, love your book, Handbook for Dads. We'll have a link in the description for it to Amazon where you can buy it. In your book, you actually say love is spelled Time. So there's that time management. How did you practically carve out quality time? You've 5 children, and ministry is relentless, it's
Yeah.
demanding. How did you carve out that quality time to prioritize your children?
Well, yeah, of course, it does just flow from your prioritizing. If you know that that's important, you're going to make time for it. And as we know, sometimes you've got to say no to some things in order to say yes to the right
Mm,
things. You can't do everything. You can't fit everything in. Some people, I think, are overworked, overstressed. Often pastors feel driven, maybe pushing the envelope too much. Prayer is a classic one where you think, am I wasting time in praying? But of course, when you pray, things seem to just go better. And that hour wasn't wasted at all. It was just
yeah.
really well invested, even if it's 30 minutes or whatever. So, we found with raising our kids, you might get a call as a pastor from a parishioner urgently asking for advice or a visit, or you've got to solve that crisis right then and there. But sometimes it's not really a crisis, and not to be callous, but you can read the situation. And if you're about to sit
Mm,
down for a family dinner, you sit down for that family dinner,
mm,
unless someone's dying. If they've died, it's too late anyway. The family can wait till tomorrow. But so of course there's crises, but often you can just say, I'll call you back tomorrow. I understand. Or you didn't even have the phone on because it was dinner.
yeah.
It was family time. And so sometimes I think we can be tempted to race off and leave what is more important, the tyranny of the urgent. So we've got to be careful that we're not just doing urgent things that maybe aren't so important. So for us, we had some non-negotiables. It was very hard to interrupt. When the kids were little, it was family dinner. When they're older, you still try and negotiate with teenagers at least one
Mm,
night a week when they're not at footy practice or music practice or whatever. And then we've always been pretty religious. I'm not a religious person, but if I was, I guess it would be our day off. And we've
mm,
stuck with that, and were generally not available. And Saturdays with kids was always sport in winter, beach in summer. And, we just wanted to still effectively lead and manage and love the church. And you can do that. I guess we haven't always been real program driven as a church. We're more family cultured. And so we
mm.
just don't want to stress our our people out, and obviously ourselves. And of course, we believe in every member being a minister. So there's delegation involved.
Mm.
You have time in your family because you build a culture where other people are available who have a pastoral gift, or an opportunity to help people with wise advice. So it doesn't always have to be you.
Feeling stuck as a church leader? Growing your church doesn't have to be overwhelming. The Hub gives you step by step roadmaps to grow a healthy church in just 20 minutes a day. Join the hundreds of church leaders who found their breakthrough by accessing my 4 decades of ministry experience, which delivers genuine results. Start your free 14-day trial today at growahealthychurch.com/hub. I think there's some amazing, really good practical advice there, Chris. I think especially around the family dinner, the family meal. I think that's, sacrosanct. You keep that really separate. I
Yeah.
love the fact you mentioned Saturday as family day, whether it's sport or beach or whatever, but it was the children. And too many pastors, I think, mess up their Saturdays with
Mhm.
sermon prep or doing
Yeah.
something else or
Yeah.
leadership stuff when I think it should be. I love that fact, that emphasis on that, but also building that culture of delegation of it's not all about what I have to do, which you often feel as a pastor, but
Mhm.
learning to really kick that in. I think it's some great advice there, Pastor. Take heed to that. Shift things around to really have a focus on that. And you also write about in one of the chapters, you called a chapter "Sell the Helicopter." And I think, my goodness, must be a wealthy pastor with a helicopter, but no, you're not talking about a real helicopter. What does sell the helicopter parenting look like in a pastor's home? Unpack that for us.
Well, of course, I'm referring to the helicopter parenting syndrome where parents can tend to hover over their kids. There's also the bulldozer parent that pushes out every obstacle
Mm,
for their children out
mm,
of love. They want the best for their kids, but if they're not careful, they're not building their kids with any sense of resilience or
mm,
risk. And there's a lot of reward when you take risks. And so in the book, I'm talking for toddlers initially, kids playing in the playground, let them climb up the tree. It's okay,
mm,
and if they fall, they bend. They don't break a real lot when they're little. They're not their bones aren't as brittle. But of course, for pastors, I think it's tempting that we carry on with that same mode or syndrome of wanting to protect our kids from the world. Christians can sometimes
mm,
be a little too concerned about what's going on in the world. Obviously, there's issues and concerns, but for us, for example, we sent all our kids to state schools. And
mm,
there's nothing wrong with Christian schools. I still teach occasionally casual teaching at a local Christian school
mm.
where
Wow.
some of our parishioners are teachers there and families are there. And I've kept my hand in with my original tent building skill, if you like, the
Mm,
teaching that I started with. And so I love kids and love teaching. And yes, have been involved in Christian schools. And for some people, that's great. But for our kids, we felt, look, you're going to meet the world at some point. You may
mm,
as well figure out what dark looks like so you can shine your light into that. And that we felt was healthy and they were
mm,
strong and robust enough to hold to their faith. They had friends who weren't Christians. They've had friends who weren't even heterosexual, and we would invite them over, and it didn't
mm.
influence them. They were more the influencers. So I think it's important we're not afraid of the world and
Yeah,
overly protective. We want to cover our kids with prayer, but then we want them to be connecting
yeah.
into the world and being influence in the world. So
And
there's a
that's helped
balance.
build resilience into your kids as you've watched them become adults and get married and become parents themselves. You've seen the fruit of that in their lives
Yeah,
as well?
absolutely. Well, by God's grace, all our children are married and serving the Lord, following
Mm,
Jesus and contributing to society in general. They're good citizens, and I mean, our eldest is a classic example of a kid pushing the envelope, pushing the boundaries. Hudson, was one of those type A kids who would just be out there. And I could have really crushed him with very severe discipline. I was brought
right.
up in a military family and I naturally leant towards being strong with my discipline, but we just had to back off and let him be
Yeah.
sometimes crazy and wild and got in trouble at school. But his strong personality was preserved along with his faith so that when he was in the army, he was able to hold
Mm,
up in his faith. He actually went to an academically selective high school where all
mm.
the smart atheist kids are going on about evolution, and he held his ground. And you
Wow.
know, so he's now, a major in the army
Wow.
and in the reserves. He's now working in the business world.
Mm,
Got a great family, successful, serving, preachers in church, and so yeah, that's an example of letting
yeah.
the kids just engage with the world and praying, of course, over them.
Brilliant. I highly recommend this book, Handbook for Dads by pastor and author Chris Brown. Top tested tips to raise great kids. And, sometimes pastors in raising children, we can feel the pressure also of finances in our family. Check out this video on watching and looking at how you can get financial freedom while being a pastor and serving the Lord, but also having the finances do all that you want as a family. Thanks so much for being with us today, Chris.
Good on you. Thanks, John.